this morning about Iraq, and this symposium is going to be about Kuwait. And we have three speakers, Dr. Ali Alkandari and Mr. Aws AlShahin and Dr. Abdelrahman AlabdelGhafour. As Dr. Ali Alkandari is an associate professor specialized in the history of the Gulf, contemporary history of the Gulf, and in Islamic movements. He got his bachelor degree in history from Kuwait University, and then his master's degree from Georgetown University, after which he went to the UK, in which he got his PhD from Exeter University. He has a number of publications about the American occupation on Iraq, and he has a book on Muslim Brotherhood in Kuwait. Uh, he has another book about Kuwait, the transformation within an oil state. He is going to talk about the vision of the Islamic movement of itself and of the state. After that, Mr. Aws AlShahin is going to talk about the Islamic movement, its policies, its achievements and failures. Mr. Aws AlShahin is an elected member in the Secretariat of the Constitutional Islamic Movement, and he's also a member of the former member of the Students' Union, and he has a PhD in political science, and he has another degree from Bradford University in the UK, and he's also a member of the Committee of Countering Money Laundering, and he's, as I mentioned, the member of the Secretariat of the Islamic Constitutional Movement. After that, we're going to have Mr. Abdelrahman AlabdelGhafour. His paper is about the experience of the Kuwaiti Islamic movement, lessons learned and future prospects. He's the head of the Hadath movement, which is the constitutional Islamic movement, and he is originally an engineer, and he has a master's of business administration. After that, we are going to have two comments. The first comment is going to be by Dr. Nasir Alsamii. Excuse me, Dr. Nasir, of course, is a well-known parliamentarian, and he has a PhD from the UK in organizational development, and he started his professional life as a lecturer and he's also an assistant to the House of Funding in Kuwait, and he has been a parliamentarian for more than 6 consecutive sessions for more than 17 years, in which he headed a number of committees and held a number of positions within the parliament. We also have a comment by Dr. Idris, Rabooh, who is Algerian and a general coordinator of the Asian Forum for Cooperation and Development. I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for accepting our invitation to take part in this important symposium. We're going to start with Dr. Ali Alkandari. You have 25 minutes. Please, sir, go ahead. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, I would like to thank you all and thank all the participants and the organizers of this series of symposia on the experiences of Islamic movements in politics and governance. I followed previous symposia related to Jordan and Iraq, and it seems that those movements or Islamic movements have many common denominators, which I'm going to summarize, and based on that, I will go into the details of the Islamic movement in Kuwait with a focus on the historical dimension, after which Mr. Aws and Abdelrahman are going to follow with their papers. So the general parameters, which is a common denominator that I could see in the other papers as well, which is the peculiarity or the special character of each society or state. This is an important determinant for each Islamic movement. So understanding the peculiarity of the society with its components, the different ideologies, the different confessional or religious components, in addition to the nature of the governance system, which needs to be understood accurately in order to avoid any misunderstandings. Another determinant is the regional and international situation at different periods. So if we talk about the 60s or 70s of the last century, we're talking about an overwhelmingly nationalist movement, in addition to the Dawa movement, which was um, translated into the Sahwa in the 80s and 90s. So it is important to take stock of the regional and international context at every point in time and how the state would deal with those contexts and even the international aspects in how to deal with the different variables. The third determinant also is the peacefulness of the Islamic work throughout its history. So the Islamic movement originally is a social change movement that is mainly peaceful and meaning to effect a social and religious reform. The fourth determinant, which we could notice over the past 10 or 20 years, which is the interaction between the Dawah and the political work. Some states have come to the point where they separated Dawah from politics, and others haven't got there yet, but they seek a sort of separation between these two dimensions because the Dawah dimension has a moral, value-based aspect that is inclusive and collective, tries to attract people, while the nature of political work includes conflict, disagreement, and a dynamic and a change of attitudes or stances. So this dissociation between these two dimensions has become a reality which the Islamic movement in all states have to adapt to. To go into the Kuwait, the context in Kuwait, if we talk about the special character of Kuwait, to look at the state of governance, it's a sheikh-based emirate, but there is also a constitution and rule of law, and there is democratic practice. Despite all the criticisms and setbacks, it is good examples in the region. And this model actually is worth disseminating in the region. So it is a political regime or a system of governance that is legitimate and accepted by all, and it is also one that is based on understanding and interaction with the components of society, even in the darkest eras or the hardest times when the opposition starts to have a louder voice. This system of governance has been able to contain the situation and interact with all. So it is a rather flexible and deeply enjoying deep-rooted legitimacy. There is also, of course, the economic dimension. Kuwait is relatively affluent in terms of economics, of the economy in comparison with other regional neighbors. and it is what we call welfare state, given the oil, which is the main source of revenue. And uh, although there were some uh, trouble or uh, discomfort of late, but the situation remains much better than elsewhere. So this welfare state also strengthens the system of governance, and it also feeds into uh, uh, people refraining from political action, because the more affluent or the less affluent people are, the more politically active they are usually. Another important determinant in Kuwait is that we have a peaceful reality where all parties are working within the parameters of the system of governance or the political arena. Even the opposition subscribes to the overall framework. Also, this political reality includes a relatively very flexible and high level of freedoms, particularly in comparison with regional neighbors. And this comparative aspect is important because in the region we live, the regimes and systems of governance affect one another on different levels, political, economic, and social. So the level of freedoms is rather high, and the democratic practice is very much active, depending, of course, on the political context. And it is quite a unique system of governance that stands out, where the people have authorities and powers according to the constitution, and they can take part or participate in making many of the important decisions, of course, that is enshrined in the constitution and in the legal texts, and is also translated into practice, although the practices might fluctuate according to the political context. This is an important introduction. When we go now into the details of the Islamic movement in Kuwait, and like all other Islamic movements, it started with a dawah movement among the young people in the mosques, with the seminars, the Quran seminars, etc. And it developed in the 60s of last century, and it started to be involved in the syndicate and unions work within the students' union, the workers' union, etc. But then they moved to the decision in 1980, where they started to take part in politics in the uh, elections of uh, of uh, the parliament. So they moved and maintained their educational and dawah activities, but also started to take part in politics, and their participation in the parliament during the 80s and even the 90s continued to have a moral standing, notwithstanding the political and reform proposals, but the Islamic character was uh, overwhelming. Uh, but then in the 1990, when we had the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, it was a great flight, but it was also an opportunity for the Islamic movement to prove its presence on the ground, and it started to have resistance, service provision, trying to help people stand fast, and even keeping up their morale. Um,
تحت الاحتلال وقرب عملية تحرير
And even under the occupation, the dialogue between the different Islamic parties, be it the Salafi, the Muslim Brotherhood, and others, and even with the other political components like the nationalists, they started to talk about introducing a new political order after the liberation. So they realized that liberation was around the corner. They had to set the ground for a new system of governance, and those dialogues revolved around the development of political order in Kuwait. So although they had freedoms in Kuwait, but they didn't have enough parties and uh, uh, representation of and banners of representation of the different components. And we had the liberation, after which we had the various political banners which emerged, and they interacted quite a lot, very dynamically during the 90s until the 9/11, which affected all the region, and which we witnessed a new era. In that era, the political discourse of the Islamic movement. But let me first go back to a point I missed earlier. After the liberation, they announced the establishment of the Islamic constitutional movement, and I believe the three papers at mine, Dr. Aus's and Mr. Abdelrahman's, tackles this particular movement. It was declared right after the liberation in the 26th of February. It was declared on the 31st of March, uh, just over a month after the liberation of Kuwait. And that movement persists to date. As for the political discourse of the Islamic constitutional movement, as an Islamic constitutional movement, it started with Islamic propositions, but with the passage of time and the constant interaction with the challenges and the political context, their propositions started to be more political than Islamic moral or value based, which does not mean that they let go of their dawah and moral standing, but that the emphasis changed a lot. So if you follow the graph, if you like, of the those propositions, you would find that there was many more propositions in terms of political reform and the amendment of the electoral system. For example, since 1981 until 2005 or 2006, we had 25 constituencies or electoral uh, directorates. So, and for each member, for each one, we have two members, and the overall number of members of parliament would be 50. And for each voter, they have two votes. But then the politicized funds started to engage in the political process, and the various political parties, including Islamic, civil, secular, or whatever, so they started a campaign called Nabih Khamsa or Nabih Fifth, in which the Islamic constitutional movement took part, and this pressure led to a change of the electoral system, making each voter have 4 votes in 5 electoral directorates or constituencies. So this issue caused a constant maturing of the the Islamic constitutional movement, and even in at the level of society. One of the ironies, which very few people would notice, their political uh, dynamics increased before the Arab Spring. Around a month earlier, what is known Dr. Jamal al-Habash's gathering, who was one of the figures of the Islamic constitutional movement and who opposed the political position of the head of the government, and there was a sort of uh, clash, and the special forces or security forces actually hit some of the members who stood up to that. But then soon after, we started the Arab Spring in Tunisia, and in early 2011, the authorities in this case took a step back, which caused an advance and progress for all components of the opposition, including the Islamic constitutional movement. So we had elections in February 2012 using the new electoral system, which gave the opposition majority in the parliament. And this parliament started to make reform propositions in relation to the reform of the judiciary, the reform of other institutions, uh, in addition to other issues proposed in the parliament, but it did not continue for long as the parliament was dissolved, but as the electoral system was changed again, similar to the way it was changed in Jordan in 1993. So that was in 2012 in Kuwait. So we had 5 directorates, but 1 vote for each voter, and all forces of the opposition boycotted the elections of 2012. It was dissolved later, but and in the elections of 2013, it was also dissolved. But then until the 2014 or 15, it was a difficult time as the Arab Spring and the counter revolutions affected all regional powers and parties, including the Islamic movement, the Islamic constitutional movement in Kuwait. But then there was an invitation to participate in elections in 2016. I will stop here and leave the floor for my colleagues Aws and Abdelrahman so they would elaborate on the Islamic constitutional movement from other aspects. Thank you so much, Dr. Ali. Dr. Ali has given us a historical overview on Islamic political action in Kuwait, but he started talking about general determinants or parameters that are common denominators for all Islamic movements in the region, and that he would focus on the historical aspect of the experience. When he talked about general parameters or common denominators, the first was the specificity of the society, state, or a system of governance, and that no generalization can be made from one experience to the other, and the other is the regional and international contexts, in addition to the temporal or the era. For example, in the 60s and 70s, we had the nationalistic movement, while by the end of the 70s and in the 80s, we had a rise for Islamism. So each experience has to be put in the temporal spatial context. And also the other determinants is that those movements are more or less social reform movements. And the fourth was the separation between the dawah and the political dimension, that some movements have got there, but others haven't yet. And at the end of the day, the dawah aspect is value-based and moral, while the political work is based on rivalry and conflict and disagreement, so it was inevitable to uh, separate those two dimensions. In talking about the specificity of the situation in Kuwait or the experience in Kuwait, he mentioned that Kuwait has a system of governance that's called the Mashyacha or the Sheikh based, with which was with democratic practice, and that it offers a good experience in the region, and that it is acceptable for all, and it has been able to contain all and address all the components. And he also talked about the economic dimension, saying that Kuwait is quite affluent and it's a welfare state, uh, because oil is the overwhelming source of income. Uh, Also, the third, that this welfare state actually strengthens the uh, regime, and the less affluent people are, the more politically active they are. The other thing is related to the political order in Kuwait, which is quite peaceful from all parties, and it accepts working within the parameters of the current regime, given that there is a relatively high level of freedoms, particularly in comparison with regional powers. The democratic experience is quite good and outstanding, as the people in Kuwait take part in decision making and have quite many authorities. And the Islamic movement started from the mosques, and in the 60s and 70s, it developed to reach a point where it engaged in unions and syndicates. But in 1980, they started to engage in the uh, elections of the Ummah Assembly or the Parliament, and they were concerned with many issues, but at essence, they were mainly the moral, social reform issues, until the Iraqi occupation of Kuwait, which was applied, but also offered an opportunity for the Islamic movement to prove its presence on the ground by helping people stand fast and introducing resistance. But there was also the dialogue between the different political parties about the development of political work in Kuwait, as they did not have many political parties. And after the liberation, they started to introduce new political banners, and the Islamic constitutional movement was established almost only a month after the liberation. There was popular interaction with those political banners until 9/11 2001, which affected the political order all over the region. This constitutional Islamic movement has also evolved after the occupation of Iraq, after it was declared, after the liberation from the Iraqi occupation, not only in terms of its Islamic nature, but the maturing and graduating from one stage to the other, and introducing propositions related to the amendment of electoral system and the change of the political order. Before this proposition, the electoral system was based on 25 direct electoral directorates, 2 votes for each, hence, and 2 members for or representatives for each electoral directorate. But after the pressure, the electoral system was changed into 4 votes per voter. Um, and before the Arab Spring, there was much action and agitation within the political order, and there was friction. But when the Arab Spring erupted, the regime took a step back, and there were multiple parliamentary elections in 2012 and then in 2015, where the opposition got the majority for the opposition, but then it was dissolved. But after 2012, at the beginning, it was dissolved and it was boycotted by the Islamists until 2016, when the counter revolutions and the Arab Spring had its implications for Kuwait as well. Thank you for your presentation. We go now to Mr. Aws to talk about the constitutional Islamic movement.
والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم.
In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, thank you so much. I'm very proud and honored to have the opportunity to join you, this distinguished group of speakers and our distinguished uh, speaker, moderator, and I thank you so much for this opportunity, and I wish everybody all the best. In my paper, which I present a summary of, I wanted to talk about details that may not have been addressed before. So I was reluctant whether to talk about achievements and successes from a purely electoral point of view, like in the media outlets, like what happens in the evaluation about how many votes, who won, etc. But then I realized that it would be better for me to provide you with an assessment from within, from my short experience, which nonetheless may have some implications that are that may be good. In this presentation, which includes 15 slides, I talk first of all about the priorities of the Islamic movement, particularly at the time being. And when I talk about this stage, I'm talking as of 2020 to date. And actually, within that 1 year, we had many developments and changes within the movement itself, but also later in its surroundings and context. The other issue is the opportunities, whether those that were seized by the group or by the movement or not. And the third point would be challenges faced by the Islamic movement, after which I'm going to start with my conclusion, or end with my conclusion, sorry. First of all, the strategic planning, and in this case, I'm talking about short to medium term planning. I'm not talking about the mission objectives of the movement, but I am talking about uh, the short to middle term, so the ability to work on the short and medium term plans through the recommendations of the political office or through from the bottom up by commissioning from the
آليات للتعامل مع هذه السيناريوهات حتى نفهم الأولويات ونفهم التوجهات الحالية. أنا وضعت أمامي 5 مستندات أو 5 أولويات مرت علينا خلال الفترة الماضية.
So I have 5 priorities that I have put in front of me, that we have gone through in 1 year, and I have found 5 main commonalities that we have been taking. The first thing and the main issue is that the Islamic movement cannot work with away from the other components, whether the other blocks in the parliament or the political elite. So we can see that from the 5 documents that I have studied, they are all calling on the work with the group. The only difference that happens based on the different conditions, whether the movement wants to confront or to be on top of this group work, or it wants to be under a larger umbrella. So it has always been believing in collective work And this is one of the distinguishing matter or features of it is that they have always been trying to direct and orient the ideas and opinions within the parliament. The other point is that in all of the problems that we have seen in the past is that they try to improve themselves. And one of the priority, regardless of the tension that is taking place or the level of smoothness within the relationship between the parliament and the government, it was one of its priorities. The third one is survival and the continuation of the legislative authority, which means not to waste the Ummah Council so not to take any sharp stances that will lead the authority to dismantle the legislative authority or the parliament. So there was always a need for protecting the Ummah Council and to maintain its survival, because at the end of the day, this is a platform that allows for participation in legislating laws and to provide the opinion through this body and to contribute in the economic and the social atmosphere, which sometimes comes under some constraints and sometimes there is a wide space for acting. There is always also, however, two lines in which the movement was going through, in addition to the three pillars that are repeated within the priorities of the movement. The first line, which is usually used in the structures and the entities of the movement, which is anything that has to do with the restructure of the ruling family. The movement doesn't involve itself in it. They don't issue any statements or any comment about that, and they don't think of taking part in that. The other line of thinking, which is in parallel to this line, is the issue of the legitimacy of the regime and not to overthrow it or try to overthrow it at all. My colleague spoke about the peculiarity of the environment and the society within which it is working. So these are two lines that they have maintained throughout. One of the priorities as well is the striking a balance between the services and what is related to the or the people or the population and what is related to the elites. There is, for example, a newspaper that it publishes just like other movements, and it speaks in it about security, development, and it speaks about the regional security threats. In the past 2 months, for example, there were achievements, and they speak about the achievements that are important for the ordinary people, and they don't talk about, for example, democratic reforms or political issues or widening the political spectrum. So they speak about the day-to-day concerns of people. This was a very distinguished step that they have taken. There was an hearing of the Minister of Defense in the Parliament. The movements have seen or have dealt with very distinguished pragmatism in a pragmatic way, and they renewed the vote of confidence of this minister in an issue. And maybe for people who are not Kuwaiti, they will not understand it, but which was the providing support for 100,000 Kuwaiti family. It might be strange when we are speaking about political issues or that these are not political demands, but this is the balance that they have tried to make between what is related to the population and what is related to the elite and the political sphere. These are some examples of some of the initiatives that the movement have made, including what is related to the COVID-19 crisis, the education issue, and improving the education of the students facing problems, and maintaining the cooperation that is great in the country, dealing with the worship places in Ramadan, the housing problem, the food security. All of that shows that the movement has its own literature, literary production, and thought production. Some of those points are for documentation, and other publications are for finding solutions and to find such solutions to problems that happen. Now, speaking about the internal structure, this is the internal structure of the movement is ever expanding for several reasons, internal and external. This expansion led to the necessity to have modern systems and have mechanisms that can go line in line with the demands of the situation or the conditions in which they are working. Some of the external reasons, for example, the expansion of the electoral districts. So this structure proved that it is capable of expanding, and it is capable of adapting to the new conditions and situations. The secretary of the movement, it met last year, and they meet every 4 years. They agreed on reviewing the bylaws of the movement, which is the backbone of the movement, and afterwards reviewing the bylaws of the movement, and they agreed on having other rules that have to do with the penalties, the work of the internal offices, and other matters. Some of the another priority, or which is the final priority under the line of priorities, which is corruption combating, and this is found in all of the plans that are adopted by the movement. The movement looks at it from different angles. When I talk about initiative, taking initiative is of two parts. First, for the first example, when the members of the constitutional movement took the initiative voluntarily to provide the statements of their financial accounts to the parliament. So they took the initiative voluntarily in order to make an example that can be followed by other members of the Ummah Council and other officials. So the movement has taken the initiative in on the outside or the external level. In the internal level, in the conference of January that was held in January, people were they have set mechanisms for providing statements of the individuals, statements, financial statements, and in order to put in place rules and procedures for following all those issues. In terms of the following up on the issues that includes hearings in the parliament, they provide projects or provide data that in cooperation with other groups. In terms of accountability, they also do that through the blocks in the parliament, and they demand for information and data. And in terms of legislation, they agree on a set of laws or legislations on combating corruption, and there are precise criteria for the laws related to bidding. There is receiving gifts by the members of the Ummah Council, as well as other groups, other laws. We are talking about 6 laws. That is a package that was passed in the Ummah Council. I will conclude the first topic, which is the priorities, by this. The Islamic issues, locally and globally, were one of the important issues within the movement, and Dr. Ali said that the representatives, or the first representatives of the movement, were focusing on the behavioral aspect, the cultural aspect, and societal aspects. There are also importance of the higher issues, for example, focusing on the Palestinian cause first and foremost, as well as other issues. And usually, this interest is shown in statements that they publish, just as what happened in the what the Muslims are going through in Al-Quds, Jerusalem, India, or other places. So they issue statements regarding these issues. One of these statements was about the normalization of relations between the Zionists and Morocco, which shows that the movement has gone beyond the issue that even if there are commonalities with other political entities, but talking about normalization is a matter for them that is a breaking ground or a breaking point that cannot be maneuvered or abandoned. In 2019, and when the first signs of normalization from the Gulf started, the movement has mobilized 12 leadership from the Gulf to denounce the normalization from Bahrain. And they said that if there is any breach in the balance in terms of the normalization in Kuwait, so there will be a domino effect and the problems in the regions. So when that was the first stance they have shown, when there was the first signs of normalization of relations with the Zionists. For the sake of time, I will move now to the second topic, which is the opportunities, and I will start with the renewal. In the 5 electoral districts, they elect members that represent the General Secretary of the movement. Members of the General Secretary, in their first meeting, they select a secretary, and from that a secretary, and from that they select the representatives in the general conference. In this time, with the renewal, the aspect of transparency was added, and the movement puts on its official account the membership in the secretary, and we can see their engineers, doctors, professors, businessmen, teachers from different backgrounds and cultures. The issue of empowerment of women and youth. Since 2008, the percentage of representing women in the council, in the leadership councils, and here I'm talking about the secretary and the general assembly, the representation of women has never gone below 20%. Today, for example, the general conference that was held in last January, the we have a female Assistant Secretary General and a young Assistant Secretary General for the first time. The youth has come first in the first rank in the recent elections of the Secretary General, and now they represent about 59% of the members of the Secretary. Sorry, the General Secretariat. And the youth, of course, they are holding all the offices of the political office or the seats of the political office. In terms of the internal fabric, we have this is also one of the opportunities when the movement, the constitutional Islamic movement, moved from the opposition to compete on the seats of the parliament. We found maturity and commitment to the opinion of the group, and we can say, or we can always see that the movement uses social media about and they always speak about participating in the council and never boycott it, and they have worked on the electoral level to mobilize the people behind them. So the internal solid action and solid fabric is one of the opportunities. Of course, that doesn't mean that there were some people whose membership was eliminated from the group, but we didn't find any division or any defection from the movement in the past. This opportunity now, the other opportunity is about the peculiarity, as Dr. Ali mentioned, the peculiarity of the Kuwait, and this opportunity is the Kuwaitization. And there are several factors of interaction. So despite the interaction with the different ideologies, the movement was able to get into the social platforms and the fora, the different fora. And sometimes when whoever speaks about any foreign belonging or foreign affiliation or any accusations that are provided, however, the members of the movement are working in harmony with its local reality, and here that's what I'm saying, or what I'm calling the Kuwaitization of the activity of the movement. Another opportunity is the accumulated experiences, and here I'm speaking about the individual level and the collective level. At the individual level, the movement have moved, or at the collective level, it has moved since its establishment in 1931 from the opposition to get one of the ministries, and then to have a membership of the Ummah Council with more than 10% of the seats, and then becoming a part of the Islamic bloc, and then a member of a different parliamentarian blocs. This accumulation of experience improved the skills of the members and improved the collective thinking of the movement, in addition to the different backgrounds, socially, professionally, culturally, and economically, and even religiously, of the members of the group, and that provides sustainability of the group. I will close or conclude with the challenges, and very briefly, I believe that the disengagement that happened between the political activity and the constitutional Islamic movement and other entities that I called the sisterly entities or groups in the field of business, for example. This disengagement that took place officially a few years ago, and based on which a number of steps were taken to ensure the disengagement and independence, maybe things will be confusing to some people, but there is a need to solidify this conviction about the importance of the disengagement and other commitments. The control of government, this is one of the challenges. For example, when they changed the electoral system and the electoral districts, this has been a challenge and this still is. Corruption, which is combated in the government institutions, it has its cast its shadow on the movement, and there were several hearings in that regard. Once again, the electoral system with the changes that are happening, and the movement is trying to deal with the dynamics smoothly. Then another challenge, the availability of resources, the sustainable availability of resources, and the other one, the theorization and the authentication of the group. With all due respect to people who are working in the movement, but there are documents and publications of the movement. Some people are working on documentation, some people are working on producing a new material, but there is a gap because this work is not being conducted in an organized way. The looseness of the collective work, sometimes this collective work has become a victim of the blackmailing of the government at sometimes, and sometimes it gets too involved in the mobilization of the people. So this this raises a problem if the constitutional Islamic movement is the only example in such environment to be organized and working. So this is one of the challenges, and the legitimate terms of reference, or the Sharia terms of reference, which allows or which it obliges the movement to ask for religious fatwa for certain issues that they face. So even if the political and the strategic and the interest points of view should be overweight over the religious opinion. So this is a problem that the movement should solve. And finally, I will conclude with a statement of the Mr. As-Sa'idi in the general conference that was held recently. And there are key words that through which I inspired the priorities that I have come up with and the opportunities. First, he is calling for a rational movement that leads but is not led, that takes initiative and doesn't wait, that communicates with the actors, players, decision makers, and does not suffice with criticism and confrontation. He calls at the same time to wisdom, balance, and critical balance between the popular ambitions and the national commitments, religious constants, and the interests to be taken into consideration. It is a movement that are integrated with each other, and the opinions are coordinated, reaching the boats of rescue in the positions and assessments. Thank you very much for your listening, and I'm sorry if I took more than the time allocated for me, and I hope that I clarified some or an internal view of the movement with all the steps and measures that are taken by the movement. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Aws, for your presentation. Mr. Aws spoke about an internal view as a member of the General Secretariat of the Constitutional Islamic Movement, Hadath. He spoke about the challenges and opportunities and the priorities. He said that part of the priorities as the strategic planning of the movement in the past, and the movement has talked about the strategic plans that they have, and that they require better strategic planning. At the time, there are 5 commonalities and the priorities that set the parameters of the strategy. The first 3 priorities are keenness on working in a collective political work, so they don't act alone, because there might be some differences on the confrontations, but there is agreement that they need to work in a collective manner. The second priority is to work on combating corruption, and the third one is to maintain the survival of the Ummah Council, and not to give any justification for dismantling the council, because. And there are 2 points that he said they are 2 important points that the movement takes into consideration in all of its political activities, which means they are red lines. The first one is related to the authority or the ruling family, and that the movement will never be part of any difference or any dispute in the changes in the ruling family. And the second one is the maintaining the legislation, or not talking about any change of regime or toppling the regime. Then he spoke about the opportunities that they are talking about strategic issues. They are important for the political atmosphere, and this is this discourse for the elites, but they should not it should not affect the services they provide for the population. So they try to strike a balance between the services and things that they provide for the people, and things that are important for the day-to-day. And he gives an example that there was a hearing of the Minister of Defense in the parliament, in which the cases of hundreds of people were presented that have problems with the housing and the Ministry of Defense. The other point is the internal structure that the movement is expanding, and he focused that after 2016, the movement decided to join the elections. The structure is ever expanding with the new staff, with the new cadres, whether by the renewal of the electoral districts or other issues. The other one is the general combating of corruption, and this is an ongoing process which includes a number of measures and the steps like taking the initiative, following up, accountability, demands, and legislation, and they try to combat corruption through the legislations that are adopted in the parliament. He also spoke about the general Islamic issues locally and globally, including first and foremost the Palestinian cause and the problems that affect the Muslim communities in around the world. And by doing and he gave an example of the statement or a stance that they took against the normalization of relations between the Zionists and the Moroccan government, although the government was led by an Islamic movement, so they went beyond the commonalities with other movements, and they showed that this is a central issue for them. The other point is the renewal within the movement, and he said that there is a tradition within the movement movement, that they renew their cadres and they renew their systems, and they have a general conference that they hold every 4 years, including, for example, the empowerment of women and youth. And he gave some figures and percentages of women and youth who are occupying a number of positions within the ranks of the movement, and that the youth today represent about 60% of the members of the General Secretariat. Then he spoke about the internal solidarity, which means the commitment to the decisions that are made, even for those who objected that decision. And he gave an example, and there were no attempts to leave or divide or defect from the movement. And he also talks about the nature of the Kuwaiti community, which has its impact on the movement. And he also, one of the opportunities that he spoke about, the accumulated experiences, which allowed for the movement, which has been there for over 30 years, to move from the opposition to the one of the ministries and then to the parliament, and moving from one block to another. And which means that they have built a collective thinking and experience that allows it to work in different fields, depending as well on the different backgrounds of its members. Then he concluded with the challenges that the movement is facing, and he talked about the control of the government, which is one of the challenges, because they have some confrontations with that. He talked about corruption and its spread in the community, the electoral system and how it needs to be reformed. He spoke about the lack of the sustainable financial resources that can cover for the plans the movement wants to achieve, and the lack of theorizations or and authentication. He also spoke about the looseness of the collective work, or the lack of maturity of the collective work. And then he spoke about what he called the legitimate, or the terms of reference, the religious terms of reference, which which is a main challenge on some points, like the rights of women, for example. And he concluded that the movement should be a wise one that takes the initiative and doesn't wait, leads, but is not led, and that takes into consideration the purposes and interests of the people, and where the generations are integrated and the members are working hand in hand. Thank you very much, Mr. Uwais. And now we move to Mr. Abdelrahman AlabdelGhafour, the head of the political bureau. And we hope that he uses the computer for good sound quality.
والمداخلة طبعا هي عن الدروس المستفادة وآفاق المستقبل من
His paper is going to be about the lessons learned and future prospects from the experience of Islamic movement in Kuwait.
ما نسمع الصوت.
We can't hear you yet. Your microphone is muted. Can you unmute it, please? Okay. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, peace and blessings be upon Prophet Muhammad and his companions. First of all, I would like to express my honor meeting all of you and this constellation of speakers, and I hope that what I will present would be up to the bar of this group of speakers. And my paper talks about a number of lessons learned from the experience and the accumulation of this experience and the different issues that we went through. Ultimately, it is the learned lessons from years of experience in the constitutional Islamic movement. When we look to accumulate experiences, we may write in hundreds of pages about the lessons learned, but I tried to summarize this or boil it down into four main areas to be more effective and to be able to present them within this time frame. At the beginning, I would like to clarify, of course, something uh, very well known, that what I'm going to say does not represent me as a person, or but also that it does not represent the movement as a whole, and this wasn't officially endorsed by the movement, but it is based on my own experience within the movement. So this is a reflection of my points of view from the lessons learned in the experience of the Islamic movement, but I believe that they are by and large consistent with the views of the Islamic movement itself. Very briefly, I will speak about four main areas. First of all, in relation to the internal structure or institution. The second is in relation to a relationship with the government and with the public and the balance thereof. And the third is a general lessons, and the final is related to the management of finance. In terms of internal structures or organization, here I refer to a basic or essential issue, the most important lesson related to the experience of the movement is that there is no interest or point in clashing with the grassroots at all. If there is an opinion cherished and held by the grassroots, there are two options. Either we embark on a dialogue to try to change those convictions or to reflect our points of view, or we actually adopt the opinions held by the grassroots or the constituency, trying to monopolize or be opinionated about your views, or claiming to have the upper ground or the moral standing to take a different stand may be right, but it would be detrimental to the continuation of the movement and its constant relations to its constituency. So what we need to do is to adopt and adapt the opinions of the grassroots to reach and try to gradually change the convictions, if at all. The second issue in relation to internal structures and organization, we now see how history is falsified while we're still alive, let alone what's going to happen dozens of years to come. So documentation and archiving is very, very important. And though it's regarded as an insignificant issue, although it has proven to be one of the most important political weapons, much of the information now is being deformed, distorted, and disseminated. And we can see now in the war, the Russian war against Ukraine, that some information is disclosed, others are being blacked out in order to manipulate public opinion. This issue is sometimes lost in the day-to-day operation of political life, so it has to be highlighted. The third is the generation gap, or is one of the norms of life and is inevitable and cannot be overcome within any movement or political party. But what needs to be done is to learn how to manage well this conflict or this gap. Uh, of course, a person at 60 or 70 would have a different level of maturity, different priorities, and different outlook than people in their 30s or 20s. These issues give rise to internal conflict that might reach a point of accusations of betrayal, and management of such gap requires smooth flow of information, requires transparency and cooperation in order to uh, have common and close understandings to avoid the West. Another important issue based on experience is that there are three issues that contribute to the cohesion of a political movement. The first is respect to the regulations and also the use of shura on consultation in decision making and dispute resolution and resolve in addressing any misdemeanor or transgression in political affairs. Of course, all those active in the political arena have their commitments, have their priorities and interests. So commitment sometimes is a bit hard for them. But if you fail as a movement to be strict in addressing any transgression, you will find it hard to maintain your constituency. So it is important to have detailed regulations without ambiguity, because ambiguity in regulations cause a lot of confusion, and lack of respect of regulation causes a lot of confusion, and also lack of use of consultation or shura uses a lot or causes a lot of unrest. The next point is to work through joint umbrellas with others in order to reach outcomes in addition to avoid risks. It actually requires more effort in terms of coordination, reaching compromises, etc. However, it constitutes a hedge and helps reach outcomes. Individual or monocolor sort of work is easier and would go smoothly with your constituency, but may not lead to the aspired outcomes and would incur larger risks. The following point in the first point is giving attention to construction and ability to continue or persist and focus on long-term gains. Very often people are consumed in the current moment and they forget about the long-term implications of their stances. Very often, for example, in the parliament, there have been some clashes with some strategic figures or people who have long-term influence. So conflicts at a certain moment may win them a short-lived popularity, but in the long run, it will be a very costly decision. So this long-term cost in comparison to the short-lived gains like popularity or support from the constituency, but ultimately Very rarely do we notice giving good heeds to the long-term implications. So the lessons learned, or the lesson learned, is to focus on the strategic perspective rather than the immediate short-lived outcomes. The second point is in relation to relation between the movement and the public, as well as the regime or the government. In general, what manages or what regulates the political stance are three issues. Um, we have the principles and values, and we have the national and political interests. For example, the maximization of participation of the party or the movement, and the second is interaction with the public and with the masses, because if the political stance is consistent with public held views, it would win them constituency. And the third issue is values and principles. As for the relation to the government and the public, this is an important point because any authority would look at any political parties as a threat to their continuance in power, regardless of their stances. So any executive authority would regard political parties as rivals in its own power. So if we understand this mindset of the people in authority, we will deal with them more easily, and we would understand the reactions more easily, and we will predict their behavior more easily. But if this is absented from our understanding, we will find it hard to understand the attitude of the authority or the executive branch. This is followed by another intuitive fact, which is that every authority has a stick and a carrot. So if it provides any immediate or long-term gain, this is the carrot, and a threat is the stick of any authority. Of course, the models differ from one state to the other. Some states are very harsh. Some states are more merciful. Some are legal. Some work outside the legal framework. But this is an important determinant, nonetheless, that in any defiance or conflict with the authority, the authority would either use the stick or the carrot, or has a stick and a carrot policy. So the general rule in general is that the state has a longer standing ability to address things than the masses. So even if the masses can persist for a month or two, the state would always try to prolong any such a struggle so that people would give up on their demands. So in any conflict, we will have to understand that the state is more capable of managing the conflict on the longer run. Another issue is that at times of conjunction, and when the masses are motivated or mobilized, it is wrong to stand in the face of the masses, but it is good to try to reorient So you cannot stand in the face of a flood, no matter how much power you have, because at those moments, things are not rational, and nonetheless, people want a quick outcome. And this applies to the following point, which is that the going with the authority into extreme battles would mostly be doomed to failure. So if we are talking about political battles, it's usually a mixed ground where we should not be pulled into using different tools, because the state at the end of the day has a diversified toolbox, even if it goes beyond the legal framework or the framework of the constitution. So we need some wisdom in dealing with this. And also, finally, most achievements and gains are gained not by pressure but by negotiations at certain junctures. When there is a certain crisis, and negotiation is the way to get with achievements or gains, after which we have an understanding to achieve those achievements and gains. The final 2 points in relation to relations with the masses or the state, we need to know the red lines of the other side, and we have to update those red lines regularly, because every so often there are new red lines introduced and others obliterated. So if we are working on the map on the old map of red lines, we might fall into trespassing new red lines without being aware of it. So those red lines need to be updated in order to avoid any political embarrassment. And finally, some of the options or the choices that the movements have to face is the presence of some extremists outside its own ranks that push it to extreme options, to push the movement as a whole from the center to so you find extremists being fanatic or being very stringent about certain Islamist questions, and at and we have the other extreme at the end, So it turns out to polarization at the both extremes away from the center, but in reality, most of the constituency or most of the people would tend to be in the center. So this should be avoided in order to achieve the best results. Third, I have to move to the general lessons through political work, since we could say those are almost general rules. First of all, we have to avoid being extreme in our approaches or opinions, because in politics, you are always prone to change, and this is going to be embarrassing if you have to step back. For example, we tried this when we boycotted the elections, and then we went back to the elections. And some people said that after this strong attitude or strong stance, this is going to be hard. So you have to take into consideration when you say something or when you take a position that you might have to change your position at some point in the future. The other lesson is that today, with the social media and the ease of access to information, Some people believe that they have to comment and talk about each and every development, and of course this befalls us in so many embarrassments and to go into battles and disagreements which we have not actually chosen or we shouldn't have been into. So comments by any political entity have to be by choice and have to be wise when and where and if at all to comment, and not to comment in any thing and everything. Another point which I believe I have mentioned already, the most people are inclined to stand in the middle or in the center, but there are certain points in time in every country where we have extreme polarization, but this extreme polarization is usually a temporary period, after which people go back to the fact that they most are inclined to stand in the center. So we cannot build a permanent strategy or plan based on a polarized situation, because this polarization is a temporary status. Also, one of the rules of political action is that uh, all the time the main dynamo of people is hostility in a way. So you would engage in the fiercest of battles, and just to prove your enemy wrong, and it is easy to be pulled into those sorts of battle. But so any rivals created in the political action, it will remain so for a long time. So we need to minimize the number of enemies or rivals. It is easy to make people enemy, but it would be hard to change the situation in the long run. So we need to avoid or minimize the number of rivals or enemies in the political arena. Another general rule is that we need to avoid being the fuel in other people's battles. Very often, political actors in the political arena have different battles and different interests, and everybody is looking for fuel for their battles. The uh, banner can be based on principles or interests or any such big terms, but the situation has to be considered and examined very closely before engaging in any battle in which we are the fuel of other people's battle. At the end of the day, no political party is interested in engaging in battles of others, although this happens unconsciously or unintentionally by certain political parties because they are not aware of this dynamic. The other issue, which is usually quite recurrent, which is the gap between reality and the objective or the target. So, for example, it remains constant. So, for example, I aim at a score of 10. When the reality changes, you want to get a score of 15. But the in other words, the gap between your objective and your reality would be constant. And this gap, we need to know when to stop changing that. It is necessary to base our choices on an understanding of reality. If we don't understand the framework or the limitations we are working with, we will continue to try to get gains that are beyond our reach. Then the final point in this aspect is related to the management of the state is much more complicated and harder than is understood at first sight. You would be surprised at the many ramifications. The final point in relation to financial management, and this is something that's quite troublesome in most political parties for many reasons, because uh, money or funding is an essential motive for many of the actors. The first point is that if you think that absolute transparency can be applied in politics, you are mistaken. Most sponsors and most backers don't want their names to be associated with the political parties they support. So transparency in that sense is difficult. So we need to regularize an alternative that is realistic, but that also maintains a relative sense of transparency, such as opening the accounts for the books, etc. But we need to understand that this is the nature of political work. The other point is the importance of constantly looking for permanent resources. Most parties work mostly on increasing their revenues or their resources during stability eras. But of course, each party has their own backers and supporters, and this has to be taken into consideration when making decisions. Finally, in terms of the media and funding is the fuel for any influence, and of course media needs funding, and also media makes funding increase or resources increase. So this alliance is necessary or is essential for any genuine political engagement. I don't want to take much longer. I hope I have summarized the main point I wanted to make. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you so much for listening. Can you stop sharing your screen, please? Thank you so much, Mr. Abdelrahman. Your paper was about lessons learned from the Islamic movement in Kuwait, and it was based on experiences and stances over the years in Kuwait, and that those lessons represent the speaker rather than the movement, but is based on his experience within the movement. He talked about four main areas: the internal organization, relation to the government and to the people, general lessons, and the financial management. In terms of internal organization or structure, he talked about six main issues. First of all, that there is no interest or gain in clashing with the grassroots, and if at all, we have to build that on dialogue to change convictions or to adapt or adopt the opinion publicly held. And also the second thing is about documentation and archiving. The third is about the generational gap, which he believes is inevitable in any movement, but what needs to be done is to manage that gap and enhance transparency. Fourth is to have regulations and consultation or shura in decision making, and that resolve is essential in any enforcement or any regulation, and also to work within alliances, which is better in terms of the outcome and avoidance of risks. The other issue is to focus on construction and the continuation of gaining support, working on strategic level rather than short-lived achievements. The second point he talked about was the relation with the government and the public. He said that any political stance is influenced by three main issues. First of all, political and national interests, which is represented generally by the government or the political authority in a certain state. The second is the public opinion or interaction with the public. And the main source of or determinant of such decisions for any movement is the values and principles. So when we talk about the determinants of this issue, we have to focus on a number of things. First of all, the authority, particularly the executive branch, always try to maintain their power. If we understand that this is one of the main issues for them, we will be able to deal with them better. And also, the government uses a carrot and stick policy, and that each state has its own methods, but any movement has to understand that the policies pursued by the state they operate in. The third issue is the ability of the state to work on issues in the longer run much more than the masses, because the masses may not have the ability or the stamina to continue for a long time agitating for a certain thing. The other issue that in terms of hot junctures, the state will not clash with the public but has to get along. The fifth is to, if you go into extreme polarization, you will most probably fail, even if you achieve short-lived achievements. The other issue is that most achievements and gains are gained through negotiation between the movement and the authority. Seventh, the movement has to understand what are the red lines and has to update those red lines for the state it operates in. Finally, he said that we need to be careful from extreme polarization or being extremist about certain positions, because it makes the movement doomed to fragmentation. The final point, the next point was about general lessons. I believe he mentioned 9 lessons. One, that you should not be extremist in your opinions or attitude, because those attitudes or stances may be changed in political terms. Second, there is no need to comment and have an opinion in all issues, and have to be wise about what issues to talk about. Third, that most people are inclined to stand in the center at times of polarization. Fourth, that hostility is the main dynamo for people in politics or rivalry. So, however, we should minimize the rivals and enemies. Fifth is that we have to avoid being a fuel in the battles of others. Six, the gap between reality and the objective remains constant no matter with the passage of time. So people have to learn where to stop and say it's enough. And the other issue is that finally, that managing a state is much more complicated and much more harder than one would imagine. The final issue in relation to financial management, he said that absolute transparency was impossible. Instead, it has to be regulated in a realistic manner for every political group or party, and also that permanent resources must be sought, and that the best time to do so is at peaceful and stable times. Third, that backers or supporters for any movement have their own interests and objectives, and those objectives have to be taken into consideration in decision making, and that media and finance are the fuel for any political action, and they are mutually reinforcing. Thank you so much for those lessons learned, Mr. Abdelrahman. Now we move to our commentators. We start with Dr. Idris Mamdouh, the General Coordination of the Asian Forum for Development.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Peace be upon you all. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you clearly.
أولاً
الصوت غير واضح دكتور إدريس.
Dr. Idris, your voice is not clear at all. First of all, I'd like to thank the speakers. I'd like to thank Siga. Okay, it seems that I have to change my position because the voice is not coming well. Okay, I will move to the other commentator then in the meantime. Dr. Nasir, thank you so much. Is my voice clear? In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, peace and blessings be upon Prophet Muhammad and his companions.
العفو دكتور ناصر احنا ما نسمع بس اذا ممكن بعد مداخله
Unfortunately, we can't hear Dr. Nasir. Yes, you can switch to the off channel, but can we, after Dr. Nasir, take 5 minutes in order to pray Al-Asr, for Al-Asr prayer, please? Actually, during the summary of Dr. Sami, I prayed the Asr. So thanks for all the interventions and presentations, and thanks for this very important symposium. If I am to comment on the 3 papers, I believe that all the papers, Dr. Ali, the historical overview, the points made by Mr. Aws were very outstanding, and I cannot add to that, although I believe his point, his approach was not comprehensive in the sense that he focused on the last 2 years, but this was because of time limitation. But as for the lessons as well, overviewed by Mr. Abdelrahman, I believe this was one of the best experiences, and you always benefit from what he says, and he represents the young people, and he is in the ranks of the political office of the Islamic movement, but the lessons he has concluded sum up the experience of years of experience in the Islamic movement, and some of the things that he mentioned others would refrain from because they betray the imperfection of the Islamic movement, but he was very realistic and open about this. So if I am to comment at all, I will have a few points. First of all, the experience in Kuwait, the experience of the constitutional Islamic movement, it cannot be compared to others unless we take into consideration the nature of the political regime, or because thanks God, the regime in Kuwait was rather open and rational, and was one of the best to accommodate for reform, and it was under pressure to put pressure on the Islamic movement, but the regime stood fast by the idea that it was in the national interest of Kuwait not to confront or to go into a confrontation with the Islamic movement. This is to the gritted of the the Kuwaiti regime, and one of the reasons why there is a unique experience in the Islamic movement in Kuwait, and this is not a propaganda for the Islamic movement in Kuwait, but I believe that the political order in Kuwait has thankfully been rational and stood in the face of all attempts to accuse the Islamists of betrayal or etc. And we interacted with the prince, and he said that I don't defend you, but I defend my homeland. So this movement has been working with free, within democratic form, within the peaceful framework. It hasn't been detrimental to our standing. So I'm defending the national.
The Islamic movement has an institution. I remember that I had a lecture in some city, maybe in London. So they asked me why the constitutional Islamic movement is one of the rare movements that didn't have any divisions, although now all countries have seen this problem of defection and division, etc. So I said to them, maybe one of the reasons is that the institutional work within this movement is strong. So as Mustafa Abdelrahman described it with some descriptions that you don't allow those who infringe on your bylaws without any uh, accountability. So the bylaws are being elected. There is no agenda that is being advanced, although there are different blocks within the movement, or they try, for example, to advance a certain opinion, but within the acceptable framework. After all, everyone is committed to the vote of the majority, and we have voted on the critical issues with the difference of one vote, and which means that almost half of the movements didn't accept it, but they didn't attack us, they didn't work or mobilize against the decision that was made. And this is very important when we are working in collective action. So there were issues that we were promoting, and when had a law that we wanted to vote on, the majority of the work voted against the law. We were committed to that, and we voted accordingly because there is no partisan work where everybody or anyone works according to their whims. And we have the transparency, as Mr. Abdulrahman mentioned, that there is no absolute transparency. That's correct, but the transparency in the Islamic movement, which means showing our financial statement and exposing or disclosing any potential conflict of interest, and before the law of the financial provision of the financial statement, we all provided our financial statements to the to those in responsibility. And when we were asked, we said because we want to be an example for everyone else, and some other colleagues followed our suit. This is very important because it helped us for the solidarity, solidarity of the movement. There was a rare image that included the secretary generals of the movement since its establishment until today, which included five secretary generals. Uh, Usually, in other movements, there are differences and there are problems, but in our movement, we like to have consensus. This consensus is difficult to get. There is no Secretary General that speaks about the era in which he was in position, saying that it was better than the other. Everyone is in agreement and are all at the same on the same page. Mr. Abdelrahman spoke about the respect of the bylaws. I'm not going to repeat that point. The fourth point is the institutional aspect. I believe The provision of the sustainable financial resources is one of the mistakes of the constitutional Islamic movements. Although in Kuwait we have abundance of financial resources, and within Kuwait we have reputation that, or there is a stereotype that we are trying to make money in our movement, but in order to be transparent, we lack the financial resources. The only source of our income is the membership fees, and it is a small amount. And on the elections, of course, we conduct campaigns and we look for funding from here and there. But the movement failed to have sustainable financial resources, and that affected its media role. We don't have the sustainable media outlet for us that supports the movement, although there were negative campaigns against the movement. And you know that such a movement, of course, will have uh, enmities even outside Kuwait. So we don't have media activity that is integrated because of the lack of financial resources. And of course, media requires money, and media can bring money as well. We tried to make videos and interviews, but they are fragmented efforts, and we believe that for our experience, we are supposed to give lessons for the coming generations from the good and the bad aspects of our experience. So we have a lot of things that can be useful for the coming generations, or problems or mistakes that we have made that can be avoided. The fifth aspect, working in our experience and working with others, that was our concern all the time. But as you know, Dr. Sam and the dear audience, this is a very difficult point, because no matter how much, uh, no matter how many concessions you make to the others or to the adversaries, and but the competitors or the adversaries would don't want to work with that. And look what happened in Egypt, for example, when the regime fell. People didn't defend the regime. They had the same in Tunisia, the same in other countries. So we need to have experiences in this work. Now, for the Islamic political movements, they need to work on the common grounds with others. And I believe the experience in Kuwait, working with others on the common grounds in the parliament, showed that we were able to get into blocks that we can deal with, so the other doesn't feel that we are leading them, but we were in a collective work, peer to peer. And but uh, the poor partisan work in Kuwait makes such blocks and such alliances not sustainable. And this is a lesson for all, that those who need to work in politics, you need to work with others. Period. This is non-negotiable. And there are other lessons that people can learn from politics. The other lesson that Abdulrahman mentioned, one of the lessons that we had, which is in the discussion and negotiation. This is a very important lesson. Usually, the Islamic movements, they are more into the mobilizing, uh, or they work more in the mobility. So, in order to finish what we are working, we need to work with other parties and to see what can be achieved. And as the Kuwaiti proverb says, that things cannot be made through coercion. And through my experience in the parliament in Kuwait, I found that so many things could have were solved through understanding and discussion. But some popularists that call for example, no negotiations or no concessions, these things are appropriate for slogans or for populist agendas, but not for political work and for achieving anything. So it is very important to get into side talks, for example, to work in an environment of calmness, and to sit down with the enemy or with the adversary to reach a higher interest of the homeland. The final thing, which is the management of a state, is not an easy thing. And I have seen so many interviews talking about the management of states by Islamists, and some people oversimplify the role of Islamists when they reach some ministries or the parliament. Some were right, and some were just showing their enmity in these fields. I was in a ministry and I was responsible for the development in the administrative body in the state, and we had some guests as I was under secretary, and they told me that uh, uh, you can improve politically if you want to put those challenges that you have seen as an agenda that you want to have legislations for. But when I got into the parliamentarian work, I found that things are way more complicated. Although in the first 2 months I started to put proposals or drafts of laws, things that we used to call for before I became a parliamentarian. But things are very complicated, and things are not that easy, and we need to learn the experience of the government step by step, learn from people with experience, and this there is no ready-made receipt that can be implemented as you have expected before you get into a seat into the parliament. I heard a lot of lessons from the speakers now. I know that we have a lot of lessons, and we hope that we can overcome in the future. And the people who are listening to this symposium, I hope that they can provide their inputs and their advice. Thank you very much, Dr. Sami, and for SIGA and Sabah Zainuddin University. Thank you very much, Dr. Nasser. And I know that it is time for the Asr prayer in Kuwait, but there is a question about the movement of the Islamic movement in Kuwait, which was part, an important part of the international Muslim Brotherhood before the Iraqi invasion. After the invasion, there was a very important lesson. What lessons can be learned by others from what the people think about having an Islamic, an international council of Shura, or an international Islamic organization that deals with matters of the Islamic movements? What can you what lessons can you give us? Which means I'm asking the work not only at the level of the country, but at the regional or international. One of the lessons that we learned, that if you work on a level outside the country, there should be institutions that are declared, for example, an international parliament, or an institution for democracy and justice, an institution for the issues of the Ummah, like Jerusalem, Al-Quds, and others. That will be better, and away from any accusations that you are doing any kind of secret or undercover work. For example, the constitutional Islamic movement, why we abandoned or disengaged from the Muslim Brotherhood after the liberation, because we found that that organization, although it is called an international organization, but it is no secret, and everybody knows that this organization is unable to impact or influence any country or any other organization. The maximum they can do is to provide advice if they are in the same country. Uh, when we work in international organizations, the peculiarities of each country is left for people of that country. So linking yourself with an international organization is a liability or a burden, and it gives you no benefit. Maybe you will meet with some people, you can learn from their experience. That's fine, but that should be conducted through international organizations that are declared and open and transparent. Like, for example, organizations of combating corruption, Islamic cooperation organizations, for example, or other organizations that work with similar values. So if we work through such organizations, we will learn more and we will be more productive. I know that some people uh, were upset with us, and and we have, of course, our excuse, because when Kuwait was invaded by the Iraq, some of the Muslim Brotherhood members cheered that invasion, and they said that it is normal. So it was normal for us to disengage from the Muslim Brotherhood. Of course, these things have changed. Even the Kuwait, now we have good relations even with the countries that were against us. Now we have good relations with Sudan and Iraq and Jordan. They were countries that are against Kuwait in its defense, and now we have normal relations with them. So, if we want to have relations with organizations beyond our borders, it is fine, but it should be through organizations that are announced with own leaders and objectives. This will lead to learn from the experiences of others.
الإخوة إذا ممكن ننتقل إلى القناة العربية.
Well, thank you very much. Now I want you to move to the Arabic channel, and I will call on Dr.
السلام
Idris
عليكم
to
ورحمة
give
الله
his
وبركاته.
first comment.
ممتاز، وعليكم السلام، تفضل سيدي.
Peace be upon
أولا
you.
أجدد شكري للمركز مركز سيجا
First, I would like to thank
والمتأخرين من الكويت.
Siga and all the speakers are from Kuwait.
عندما تتحدث الدكتور صانع
And when Dr.
أضاف
Sane
أضاف
spoke, the picture
المشهد أكثر
became
حتى نعرف
clearer,
وجه
and he added more to the landscape in order to learn better from this experience. My intervention will be about 2 points, because all the papers talked about the constitutional Islamic movements in Kuwait. So I'm going to speak in 2 topics. The first is about the internal policies, and the other about the foreign policy. One of the speakers said that there are red lines and that cannot be crossed, which is the relation with the center of the Sijin in Kuwait, which is the Sheikhut or the Mashayikha in Arabic. Yes, there are red lines in the parliamentarian monarchies, and Kuwait is one of those monarchies. So the Mashiach kingdom or monarchy in Kuwait, it can be better, or democracy can become better uh, if the role of the sheikhhood is limited at the by the parliament or constrained by the parliament. When we speak about parliament, we are speaking about the popular willingness or will in the country. So the sheikhhood can, for example, be uh, or has its own interests in certain issues like defense and foreign relations, for example, that nobody can intervene. But I believe that there should be more democratization and more a sheikhhood parliamentarian regime And when the Western monarchies moved towards parliamentarian rule, I believe that was better. So this can be conducted uh, as well. At the same time, this will improve the role of the parties in the other point in terms of the internal policies. So I appreciate the reformative role of the Islamic movement in Kuwait and its patriotic spirit, which is very obvious and strong. However, this spirit to pay attention to Kuwait and the reforms within Kuwait, it doesn't uh, exempt the constitutional movement to overlook a number of other issues like democracy and the relation with the ruling family. So, keenness to strike a balance between the red lines and continuation of the gradual reformation. Dr. Nasser said that it is difficult, but Kuwait now is not like Kuwait 20 years ago. So there is improvements. So there should be a clear reformative agenda that can be agreed upon by the main forces in Kuwait and make steps toward that issue. The other point, and it was mentioned in the third point when you asked him about the international organization, which became a liability more than providing any solutions. And I believe the brothers in Kuwait uh, made a decisive decision when they started to work on a national agenda to confront Saddam Hussein's invasion. And here we learn, I believe, that the Islamic movement, the more the Islamic movement is involved in the national level and gets involved in the other forces in the country, they can make more benefits for their own respective countries and for other Muslim countries. So that's in terms of the internal policies. As for the foreign policies, in one of the papers, the position towards the Palestinian issue was mentioned and normalization with the Zionist regime. And here we appreciate the Kuwaiti position towards the normalization of the Moroccan regime with Israel. And this is a position that we haven't seen other from other movements who kept silence against or towards the Justice and Development Party in Morocco and their decision that they made. But the movement in Kuwait has expressed its position. Now, for the Islamic movements who are living in monarchies, most of the monarchies are normalizing relations with with the Zionists. Like here, I'm talking about Jordan, Morocco, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and Egypt. But Kuwait is resisting that, and I believe the Islamic movement has a role in the decision that is made at the higher levels to not to go into the normalization. So the question here is, why doesn't the Islamic movement uh, can improve their work with the monarchy in Kuwait and dealing with the republics, that the Arab republics that are against normalization. For example, why don't you communicate with other Arab republics in order to have a block against the normalization of the relations with the Zionists? So why is that happening? Because it seems that Kuwait is the best country that is dealing with the Arab causes throughout history, and it's not going to abandon that despite the difficult environment in the Arab Gulf and or the Arabian Gulf. And in the last meeting of the foreign ministers, the Arab foreign ministers, uh, the Kuwaiti foreign minister had a very strong position when he said that the Kuwaiti delegation will be the first to come and the last to leave in the next summit. So I believe that Kuwait can do that work in order to work with other republics and other Arab countries that are facing the normalization. So the Islamic movement can provide national position, national role, regional role, Islamic role, and a role for the Arab causes. We know that the Islamic movement and not only Hadath, the Islamic movement in Kuwait has an important role in the world, especially in the humanitarian, social, and media role. And here I'm speaking about the major charity role that was conducted by the Islamic movement in Africa and the Muslim world, and the humanitarian diplomacy of Kuwait. We know, for example, one of the charities, the Kuwaiti charities, they have offices more than the number of the embassies of Kuwait. So the question here is, why doesn't the Islamic movement in Kuwait can improve that role in order to be one of the forces that impact the political decision in foreign affairs. I believe that the brothers want to separate between the social charity and the uh, political role, and but your support or your success in the dawah and in the charity roles will help you in your politics. So if you want to move into democracy and building a strong country, all of that will help your political aspect, and you cannot only get results only from the work of the political aspect or the political field through the constitutional Islamic the Islamic constitutional Islamic movement. And speaking about the media, Kuwait has a very important role, and the Islamic movement had an important role in the 70s and the 80s. And here I will talk about the Al Mujtama journal, which had a role in rationalizing some relations in the Islamic world. But now, when we see the biased media, we have some media that sided with the Arab Spring countries and others who sided with the counter revolutions. So we believe that the Islamic movement can improve its media role and play a positive role that is in line with the Kuwaiti diplomacy that prefers not to interfere in the affairs of other countries. And that was one of the points that was mentioned by some of the colleagues, that the not having a role uh, or not having a strong media uh, role allowed other media outlets to intervene and to have a negative role in this issue or that issue. The final point, which is also in terms of the foreign policy, the state of Kuwait doesn't have a lot of enmity with other Arab countries, whether at the Gulf level or with the other Muslim or Arab countries. Uh, the alternative of the international role of the Islamic movements is their role within the country, or as Dr. Sani said, through international organizations that are declared and transparent, and where they can dedicate their financial and media resources to play that role and to be one of the supporters of the foreign Kuwaiti policy. Finally, I believe that the experience of the constitutional Islamic movement is one of the best experiences in the Arab world, and there is no similar one, whether at the level of the democratic organization, in which we see that we have former secretary generals in the movement, and this is something that is a credit for the Islamic movement. But this doesn't mean that they don't need to improve and to expand the movement and not to maintain the movement as a sectarian movement, but to be a cross ethnicity and a cross religion movement on the nationalistic basis, and to be a national movement which will make it stronger. This is evidenced in the size of the movement, because it managed to get into the community and to be present in a large segment of the community.
وتقدم النموذج لحركة إسلامية في دولة ذات نظام وراثي يمكن الاستفادة منها في
So working in a country that is in a hereditary country, so it is playing an important role in the country, and it is a role model that should be copied in other countries. And the Islamic constitutional movement should be included with other Islamic movements that disengage themselves with what the so-called international organization, to improve a new organization of cooperation that is declared and open, that take into consideration the peculiarities of each country, and without being accused of having any foreign agenda, but rather having the national agenda as its priority, and to have a new Islamic cooperation, putting the national agenda above the cross national or cross-border agenda in importance. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We're almost at the end of this symposium, but we will give each speaker 8 to 10 minutes for comments. But I have about 3 questions that I would like the speakers to address as well. The first question is about the separation between the dawah and the political aspect. How did it happen in Kuwait, and how? And is the political movement part of the dawah movement of the Muslim Brotherhood, or is it separate from it? And what is the relation between the organizational or administrative level and the ideational level? The other issue is related to the organizational level that mentioned by Mr. Aws. What does the movement do? Do they try to look for new ideologues within their ranks, or they try to reconcile with others? And what happens if there is a clash between the two sides? For example, if we assume that there is that the government wants to normalize with Israel, and you don't want to go into confrontation with the government, which red line takes precedence or priority? If you could please answer those questions and comment on both commentators. As I said, each speaker will have 8 to 10 minutes.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بالنسبة لي
Dr. Ali, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. In terms of the separation, this is an operation that took quite a while. This transformation and moving from one stage to the other, it happened in 2011 and 2012, and truly there was a separation between the political and the dawah aspects of the Islamic movement, and for each part we have a separate entity. The Islamic constitutional movement is essentially a political entity. It has its own legal person, it has its own attitude, position, and organization, and it has its Islamic character, of course, based on the literature of the Muslim Brotherhood, but it has its own peculiarity as well. And this is in terms of the transformation and separation. But before that, there was also the openness to, in terms of the openness to society. Truly, many of the movements, the Islamic movements, started to started being closed, and only later started to open up, and opening up was delayed and was planned uh, and well managed. But an important point here in relation to the Islamic movement and the community in which it operates, in the paper I heard, for example, yesterday in Jordan, they talked about the composition within the society and the tribal dimension. This continues to exist in Kuwait as well, particularly it is particularly salient at election times, where we have what is called the sub-elections or tribal elections. So for each tribe there are elections within that tribe. So we have representatives of each tribe who will run for the political elections. So this exists, and it complicates the issue of political dissemination. Of course, the tribes are a social component, but they are also political actors. So this practice persists as well. I also heard the comment in relation to the literature, and I will comment on in passing, and I will leave the deep or the profound comment to Aws. Sorry. In general, yes, there is a scarcity of writing and literature in terms of the last 10 or 20 years because of the quick changes and how to deal with those very fast changes in terms of the society, politics, in terms of general theorization and regularization. That's why, in a way, we are witnessing a sort of a transition. So there might not be very clear figures or people whom you would expect to offer alternative literature, but this is the nature of collective work. Sometimes they work in teams and they poll the opinions or probe the opinions of the grassroots or of the constituency. So they issue a paper which is practical or sometimes a theoretical, talking about future prospects and outlook. Thank you so much, Dr. Ali. Now the microphone goes to Aws AlShahin. Thank you so much again. In terms of the regularization or literature, I believe this is the question that I should be answering, right? I believe that events such as this one, where we have a dialogue between among the elite, among the ranks of the Islamic movement, having this event internally within the Islamic movement would help establish a new attitude or new literature. But now this is restricted in terms of the Sharia point of reference. So if we look at the literature of the movement and we question its stance of the participation of women, of freedoms, of confessional diversity, although this is not present in Kuwait at all, but those are essential questions. You would find that there is nothing in the literature of the movement that provides a clear-cut position from those issues. This is related to the quick pace of developments in Kuwait and the day-to-day management, and we live in a whole new world in every sense of the word. Now, when we had the recent or the latest conference of the movement, the parliament was only in session for only a month, and the new king was installed only, or the new emir, a prince, was only installed 3 months before. So the changes are quite hectic. So sometimes it is important to have a segment of cadres and specialized persons of who stand aside and who would write, document, and observe to make those conclusions and create this point of reference in ideational terms for the work of the Islamic movement. If you allow me as well, I would like to talk about the idea of normalization in order to reassure Dr. Idris. The movement has an office countering normalization, and it observes all the developments locally and regionally, and it conducts informal communication with different associations within Kuwait and outside, with BDS and other movements. And now today, two of the members of the movement, including Dr. Ahmed Mutar, who is the secretary of the International Affairs Committee, and also Osama al-Sheikh, who is a member of the Association for the Support of Jerusalem. And I met with those people who are working not only offering their own personal network and connections, but also providing it with all the access they have through their membership in the parliament, in advocating the Palestinian cause. But this is also consistent and in harmony with the official stance among the different ministers and the leadership. And the official visit included a visit to the deputy foreign minister and the speaker of the parliament. So thank God the environment is conducive for pro-Palestine work. We need further action or further effort, but in principle, Kuwait hopefully would remain on this standing based on nationalistic, Arab and Islamic standing, and not be flooded by normalization flood like other nations, unfortunately, in the region. Now the final word goes to Mr. Abdelrahman. Can he use your microphone, Mr. Aws, please? Yes, just give us a second so he moves to my place. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. First of all, I would like to thank my brothers and colleagues for their additions and for their comments, and I hope that this paper has been a contribution to the overall vision of the work within the Islamic movement in Kuwait. There was a question about whether what happens when two red lines conflict with one another. Of course, this is one of the main questions in politics, which is dealing with the better and the good and the better, and the bad and the worse. If politics was about black and white, it would have been so much easier. So necessarily, politics involves addressing red lines differently at different points, giving the context and giving the timing in order to minimize damage, etc. And try. All of those balances are very well known in politics in general. So at the end of the day, they cast their shadow on our political practice. But the example that you mentioned in the red lines does not stand, because we have no problem in terms of opposing the government's positions. We have actually went as far as asking for a vote of no confidence against a minister from the ruling family. But we don't conflict with them as a governing regime, but not as a form of management or in terms of their governance. We have no problem in the first place. It's not actually a red line at all in the first place. So we can go contrary to their positions should they take a position that we disagree with. I thank you finally for giving me this opportunity, and I wish you all the success. Thank you so much, Dr. Ali Alkandari from the University of Kuwait, Dr. Aws AlShahin, Mr. Abdelrahman AlabdelGhafour from the Islamic constitutional movement, Dr. Nasir Alsamii, the Kuwaiti parliamentarian, Dr. Idris Rabooh from the Asian Development Forum. With this symposium, we will have finished studying about 7 experiences. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about the UAE and Saudi Arabia. And next Friday, we're going to talk about Libya. And then on Saturday about Algeria. And on Sunday about Morocco. So by the end of next week, we're going to have finished the 12 experiences from Islamic movements, and then we will continue in Ramadan with an overview. Thank you so much for your participation.